Struggling single dad helps repair. Farmer's old barn, unaware she owns thousands of acres of farmland. What if the very thing you were running from was exactly what you needed to find? Jack Reynolds was a man with nothing left to lose, a struggling single father, drifting from one town to the next, searching for a fresh start he wasn't even sure existed. When his truck breaks down in the middle of nowhere, he crosses paths with Clara Hastings, a fiercely independent farmer, fighting to save her family's land from ruthless developers. She offers him a job. He offers her a reason to trust again. Neither of them is looking for love. But sometimes love finds you anyway, in a town where history is worth more than money and where a single act of kindness can change everything. Jack and Clara will have to decide. Will they fight for what truly matters, or will they walk away before it's too late? This is a story of resilience, second chances, and a love strong enough to stand the test of time. If you love stories that inspire, stories that make you believe in love, and stories that remind you that kindness can change lives, then make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because this is a story you won't want to miss. Now, sit back, relax, and let's begin. Seeds of Love. Jack Reynolds tightened his grip on the worn leather steering wheel as his old pickup truck rumbled down the desolate Texas highway. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the endless fields, stretching into the horizon. Chuck. Road ahead was long and uncertain, just like his life. In the passenger seat, his 8-year-old son, Tommy, stared out the window, his small fingers tracing patterns in the dust on the glass. The boy had been unusually quiet since they left Denver 2 days ago. Jack knew why. They weren't just moving. They were leaving behind the only home Tommy had ever known. Jack sighed, glancing at the rearview mirror. Everything they owned was packed into the back of the truck, a couple of duffel bags, a box of old toys, and his toolbox, his lifeline as a carpenter. It wasn't much, but it was all they had left. "Dad," Tommy's voice finally broke the silence, hesitant yet hopeful. "Where are we going?" Jack swallowed hard. He wished he had a better answer. "Somewhere new, kiddo. Somewhere we can start over." Tommy nodded slowly, but Jack saw the doubt in his eyes. He knew his son was scared. Jack was too. Ever since Emily, his wife and Tommy's mother, passed away in a car accident 2 years ago, life had been a constant battle. He had tried to hold on to their old life, working long hours to make ends meet, but eventually everything crumbled. The rent was too high, the bills piled up, and with no family to turn to, he had no choice but to leave. Now he was chasing a rumor, a chance at a fresh start. An old friend had mentioned a small town in Texas where people still valued hard work, where a man with skills like his could find a job and a home. It wasn't much to go on, but Jack had no other options. As if on cue, the engine sputtered violently, shaking the truck. Jack's heart sank. Not now. Please, not now. The vehicle lurched forward once, then again, before the engine coughed and died. The truck rolled a few more feet before coming to a stop at the side of the road. Jack closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. Tommy shifted nervously beside him. "Is it broken?" the boy asked. Jack forced a smile. "Just needs a little encouragement." He stepped out of the truck, feeling the evening heat pressing against his skin. He popped the hood and leaned in, inspecting the tangle of old rusted parts. It didn't take long to confirm what he feared. The fuel pump was shot. There was no fixing this here. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans, glancing around. They were in the middle of nowhere, just open fields, dirt roads, and a few distant barns. No gas stations, no mechanics. His phone had no signal. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Then a sound broke the silence, the distant rumble of an approaching truck. Jack turned, shielding his eyes from the sun, as a red pickup drove toward them, kicking up dust. As the truck slowed to a stop beside him, the driver leaned out. "Looks like you could use some help." Jack blinked, taking in the sight of the woman behind the wheel. She wore a simple button-down shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, faded jeans, and work gloves. Sun-kissed brown hair was tied into a loose braid, and sharp hazel eyes studied him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yeah," Jack admitted. "Broke down. Fuel pump, I think." The woman nodded. "That's a tough fix out here." She glanced toward the truck, where Tommy was watching from the window. "You and the boy traveling." "Far?" Jack hesitated before answering. "Just looking for work and a place to stay." She studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Well, you're in luck. I run a farm not far from here. It's not much, but it's home. If you don't mind some work, I could use an extra pair of hands." Jack frowned. He wasn't used to charity, especially from strangers. "I can pay you back once I find a job." The woman waved a hand. "I don't need your money. I need help fixing an old barn that's barely standing." "You look like a man who knows his way around a hammer." Jack hesitated. It sounded too good to be true. But he had a son to take care of, and right now they had nowhere else to go. Finally he nodded. "All right, deal." The woman extended a calloused but firm hand. "Clara Hastings." Jack shook it. "Jack Reynolds." She nodded toward her truck. "I'll tow you back to the farm. You can stay in the guest house till your truck's fixed." Jack exhaled, feeling the weight on his shoulders ease just slightly. Maybe this was the fresh start he'd been looking for. As Clara hooked up the tow line, Tommy leaned out of the window. "Dad, is she nice?" Jack glanced at Clara, who was already at work, moving with the ease of someone who had spent her life, solving problems without waiting for help. There was something strong yet kind about her. "Yeah, kid," he murmured. "I think she is." With that, the truck started moving again, toward a future Jack never saw coming. Jack's first impression of Clara Hastings was that she was a woman who knew how to handle herself. The way she worked efficiently to hook up his truck, the quiet confidence in her movements, it was clear she had been doing this kind of work for years. But as she led him down the dusty road toward her farm, he couldn't help but wonder, why was a woman like her running a farm all alone? Tommy, sitting beside him in Clara's truck, kept sneaking curious glances at her. He was probably wondering the same thing. Clara's farm came into view as they turned off the main road. It was vast, miles of open fields stretching under the Texas sky, dotted with rows of crops, a distant barn, and a quaint farmhouse with a wraparound porch. A few horses grazed lazily in the pastures. The sight was almost surreal, like stepping into a different world. "Sit." As they pulled up near the house, Clara cut the engine and hopped out. "Guest house is over there." She pointed toward a small, modest structure a short distance from the main house. "It's not fancy, but it's got a roof and running water." Jack nodded. "That's more than enough. Thanks." Clara lifted the brim of her hat, studying him for a moment. "Look, Jack, I don't know your story, and I won't ask unless you want to tell it, but I do know a man looking for a fresh start when I see one." Jack tensed slightly, but she didn't press. "You helped me fix that old barn, and you've got a place to stay until your truck's up and running." She nodded toward Tommy. "That work for you?" Jack glanced at his son, who looked up at him with hopeful eyes. Tommy had been tense and uncertain the whole trip, but for the first time in days, there was something close to relief on his face. Jack exhaled. "Yeah, that works." Clara didn't smile, but there was something like approval in her gaze. "Good. We start tomorrow morning." Jack woke to the sound of birds and the faint scent of freshly tilled soil drifting through the open window. It was peaceful, too peaceful. He was used to city noise, to the hum of distant traffic and neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Here there was only the rustling of leaves, the occasional neigh of a horse, and the rhythmic creaking of a windmill in the distance. For a moment, he allowed himself to enjoy it. Then reality set in. He had a job to do. He got up quietly so as not to wake Tommy, pulled on a clean shirt and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the scent of hay and morning dew. Clara was already up. Of course she was. He found her near the old barn, standing with her arms crossed, surveying the damage. The structure had clearly seen better days. The roof sagged, a few of the wooden beams were visibly rotted, and the doors barely hung on their hinges. Jack let out a low whistle. "You weren't kidding. This thing's on its last legs," Clara smirked. "That's why you're here." She handed him a mug of coffee, black, no sugar, no cream. Jack took it with a grateful nod. "So," he said, taking a sip, "what's the story with this place?" Clara hesitated. He could see it, the momentary flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then she turned her gaze back to the barn. "This farm's been in my family for 3 generations," she said. "My granddad built this barn himself. It was sturdy once, a place for cattle, storage, even had a dance or two in there back in the day." Jack could almost picture it. "But things change," she continued. "My parents passed when I was young. My granddad raised me here. He worked this land until the day he couldn't anymore." Jack noted the way she said it, matter of fact, but with an undercurrent of pain. "What happened to him?" Clara sighed, shifting her weight. "Heart attack, right there in that field." She pointed toward a stretch of land near the fence. "He went the way he wanted, doing what he loved, but after he passed, it was just me." Jack frowned. "No siblings?" "Nope. No other family?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not the kind that mattered." Jack didn't push. He understood loss all too well. After a moment, Clara turned back to him. "Most people figured I'd sell the place. Developers have been circling like vultures for years, offering money that'd make most people pack up and leave." Jack raised an eyebrow. "But you didn't." Clara shook her head. "Because this land isn't just dirt and crops. It's history. It's blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And I'm not letting some corporation turn it into another strip mall." Jack was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I respect that." Clara glanced at him. "And what about you, Jack Reynolds? What brought you and your boy to the middle of nowhere?" Jack hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about it, about Emily, about the accident, about losing everything. But there was something about Clara, something steady, grounded. He didn't have to tell her everything. Life fell apart, he admitted, needed to start over. She didn't ask for more. Instead, she simply nodded. "Then let's get to work." Jack rolled up his sleeves and inspected the barn. It wasn't beyond saving, but it would take hard work, patience, and someone willing to believe in it. Maybe that was the point. Maybe. That was what Clara saw in this place, and maybe, just maybe, it was what she saw in him too. As the morning sun climbed higher, Jack picked up his hammer and got to work. For the first time in a long time, he had a reason to build something again. Jack had worked with his hands his entire life. Wood, nails, hammers, these were familiar things. But working on a farm, fixing a barn, surrounded by miles of open fields under the wide Texas sky, that was something else entirely. He wiped the sweat from his brow as he straightened, glancing toward Clara, who was standing a few feet away, inspecting a beam he had just reinforced. The way she examined his work, silent, calculating with a slight nod of approval, reminded him of the foreman he used to work under back in Denver. "Not bad," she admitted. "You might just have a future as a farmhand," Jack smirked, "as long as it pays better than my last job." Clara gave him a look. "It doesn't." They both chuckled, the first moment of genuine ease since he had arrived. Tommy sat a few yards away on an overturned bucket watching them. He'd been quiet since morning, occasionally kicking at the dirt with the toe of his shoe. Jack knew that look. It was the same one he had whenever he tried to convince himself he didn't miss. "Emily, you okay, kid?" Jack asked, leaning against the wooden frame. Tommy shrugged. "Yeah." Jack waited, giving his son space to talk if he wanted to. After a moment, Tommy finally looked up at Clara. "Why do you do all this by yourself?" he asked. Clara raised an eyebrow at the question. "Do what? The farm, the animals, fixing things." Tommy gestured at the half-repaired barn. "Don't you get lonely?" Jack tensed slightly, about to tell his son to mind his manners, but Clara didn't seem offended. If anything, she looked a little surprised by the question. After a beat, she sighed. "Yeah, sometimes." She ran a hand over the old wooden beam, her fingers tracing the rough surface like it held memories only she could see. "This place used to be full of people," she said. "When I was a kid, my granddad and I worked side by side, just like this. There were always workers around, farm hands, neighbors dropping by. There was always life." Jack watched her closely. "But when my granddad passed, things changed. Most people moved on. Some took jobs in the city. Some just didn't see the point in sticking around a farm that wasn't making much money. Now, it's just me." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people gave when they were used to being alone. Tommy frowned. "That's sad." Jack glanced at Clara, expecting her to brush the comment off. Instead, she just nodded. "Yeah," she admitted, "sometimes it is." By midday, Jack had already learned one undeniable truth about farm work. It was unforgiving. The barn repairs were straightforward, but Clara made sure he earned his stay, checking the fencing, hauling supplies, and even helping her with a section of irrigation that had gone haywire overnight. It was honest work, and Jack found himself enjoying the physical exhaustion that came with it. In the city, he had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, drowning in his thoughts. Here, by the time the sun started dipping below the horizon, he was too tired to think about anything, except falling asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. That, in itself, was a kind of peace he hadn't known in a long time. By the time dinner rolled around, Jack and Tommy found themselves sitting on Clara's porch, a home-cooked meal in front of them. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken, mashed, potatoes, and biscuits, but it was the best thing Jack had eaten in weeks. Tommy, still adjusting to the new routine, ate quietly, glancing occasionally at Clara like he was trying to figure her out. Jack understood. Clara was an enigma. She was strong, capable, and independent, but there was something about her that felt unfinished, like a story left half-written. As they ate, Jack finally decided to ask the question that had been on his mind since the morning. "So, Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair, "why are you really holding on to this place?" Clara didn't react immediately. She took her time, chewing slowly, as if considering how much to say. Finally, she set her fork down. "Because it's all I have left." Jack waited, sensing there was more. "My granddad always said that land isn't just about what you grow on it. It's about what it grows inside you." She gestured toward the fields beyond the house. "This land raised me. It's where I learned everything I know. It's the only place I ever really belonged." She turned to Jack then, her hazel eyes steady. "Some people think success means leaving places like this behind, trading dirt roads for highways, small towns for big cities. But I don't." Jack nodded slowly. "And you're not worried about losing it?" Clara smirked. "Jack, people have been trying to buy this farm for years, offering me money I could never spend in a lifetime." Jack raised an eyebrow. And I tell them the same thing every time." She leaned back in her chair, a quiet, stubborn pride in her voice. "It's not for sale." Something about the way she said it, firm, unwavering, made Jack respect her even more. She wasn't just holding on to land. She was holding on to history, to roots, to something bigger than herself. And for the first time since he had arrived, Jack found himself wondering, what if this place could be a home for him too? Later that night, as Jack sat on the porch, sipping a beer Clara had left for him, Tommy climbed onto the seat beside him. "Dad?" the boy asked, voice sleepy. "Yeah, kid." Tommy hesitated, then looked out at the farm. "Do you like it here?" Jack took a slow sip, considering his answer. Did he like it here? It was hard to say, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running. "Yeah," he admitted. "I think I do." Tommy smiled a little. "Me too." Jack ruffled his son's hair. "Get some sleep, kid. Big day tomorrow." As Tommy shuffled off to bed, Jack sat in the quiet, staring out at the vast farmland under the moonlight. Maybe, just maybe, he and Clara weren't so different after all. They were, both holding on to something that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, Jack wasn't afraid to let his roots sink in. The Texas sky was a masterpiece of gold and lavender as the sun dipped behind the rolling fields. Jack leaned against the barn, stretching his sore muscles after another long day's work. His hands were raw, his shirt damp with sweat, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the ache of his body. It had been a long time since he had felt this kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from building something real. He glanced toward the farmhouse, where Tommy sat on the porch steps, tossing breadcrumbs to a stray dog that had wandered onto the property. The boy had never been one for the outdoors, but something about this place was changing him. Jack saw it in the way his son ran through the fields without hesitation, in the way his laughter echoed off the wooden fences as he tried and failed to herd the chickens. And maybe, just maybe, this place was changing Jack too. But nothing good ever lasted long. The rumble of an approaching black SUV cut through the peaceful evening air, sending a ripple of unease through Jack's gut. Clara, who had been checking the fence line nearby, stiffened at the sound of the vehicle. She dusted her hands off on her jeans and started walking toward the front of the house. Jack followed, instinctively placing himself a few steps behind her. The SUV rolled to a stop in front of the farmhouse, its polished exterior completely out of place against the rugged backdrop of the farm. The door swung open, and a man in a neatly pressed suit stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks like he had just come from some high-rise office in Dallas. Jack didn't like him already. Clara crossed her arms. "You're trespassing." The man gave her a polished smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Clara, is that any way to greet an old friend?" "You're not my friend, Simon." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't know who this slick-looking businessman was, but the tension in Clara's voice made it clear that he wasn't welcome. Simon sighed dramatically, glancing around the farm like it was some run-down relic of the past. "You're still out here, holding on to this place like it's worth something," he tisked, shaking his head. "You know, we made another offer, a generous one." "I read it," Clara said flatly, "and," she gave him a pointed look, "I threw it in the fire." Jack couldn't help the small smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth. He liked that. Simon, however, didn't look amused. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Clara, I don't understand you. This land is worth millions. Millions! Do you know how much easier your life would be if you just—" "I don't want easy," Clara interrupted. Jack saw the fire in her eyes, the same unshakable determination that had kept this farm standing long after everyone else had given up on it. Simon sighed. "The investors aren't going to wait forever. Sooner or later they're going to move on. And then what? You'll be stuck here, alone, on a dying farm with no one to help you." His gaze flicked toward Jack then, like he had just noticed him for the first time. His expression shifted slightly, curiosity flickering across his face. Jack didn't flinch under the scrutiny. He simply folded his arms and gave the man a steadfast, unimpressed look. Simon's smirk returned. "And who's this?" "No one you need to worry about," Clara replied smoothly. Jack liked that answer. Simon exhaled, as if dealing with Clara exhausted him beyond belief. "All right, have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you when this place finally crumbles around you." With that, he turned and walked back to his SUV, leaving nothing but the scent of expensive cologne and false promises in his wake. Clara watched as the vehicle kicked up dust and disappeared down the road. Only then did she exhale, rolling her shoulders as if she were shaking off the weight of the encounter. Jack shoved his hands in his pockets. Friendly guy. Clara let out a dry chuckle. Simon Whitaker, corporate real estate vulture. His company's been buying up farmland across the state, turning it into shopping malls, luxury developments, anything but what it was meant to be. Jack frowned. And he wants your land. He wants what my family built, what my granddad left behind, what I refused to sell. Jack studied her for a moment, the way her jaw clenched, the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides. He saw a woman who had spent her whole life fighting to hold on to something that meant more than money ever could, and he understood that. More than he wanted to admit. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Jack found Clara sitting on the back porch, nursing a cup of whiskey instead of tea. He stepped out, the wooden boards creaking under his weight. "Mind if I join you?" She didn't look at him, but she slid the whiskey bottle closer in invitation. Jack sat down, pouring himself a drink. For a while they just sat there in silence, the stars sprawling across the velvet sky, the crickets filling the quiet spaces between them. "You really don't have a price?" Jack finally asked, keeping his voice light. Clara smirked against the rim of her glass. "That's what Simon doesn't understand. Some things, they aren't for sale." Jack turned the glass in his hands. "Guess that makes you the last of a dying breed," Clara sighed, staring out at the fields. "Maybe." Jack hesitated before speaking again. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." Clara looked at him then, really looked at him. "Jack, I'm not saying I'm staying," Jack added quickly, though part of him wasn't so sure anymore. "But while I'm here, you don't have to carry all of this on your own." For the first time since he had met her, Clara looked tired, like the weight of everything she had been holding on to had finally caught up with her. She turned back to the fields, taking another slow sip of her drink. And then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know how to let someone help." Jack felt something shift between them. A quiet understanding, a shared burden neither of them had ever spoken out loud before. He didn't push. He just sat beside her, letting the silence stretch between them, comfortable and unspoken. Because maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to figure it out alone. Jack had seen a lot in his life, tough breaks, unfair odds, the slow unraveling of everything he had once built. But watching Clara stand her ground against men like Simon Whitaker was something different. It wasn't just about land for her. It was about legacy, dignity, and keeping something real in a world that only seemed to care about profits, and Jack respected the hell out of that. But he also knew what kind of men Simon and his investors were. They didn't take no for an answer. Next morning, Jack was up before dawn, out by the barn, checking the beams he had reinforced the day before. The work was coming along, slow but steady. He could see it now, the way the barn could stand strong again, not just as a shelter for equipment, but as a symbol of everything Clara was fighting for. "You're up early?" Clara's voice broke through the quiet. Jack turned to find her leaning against the fence, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much since Simon's visit. "Habit," Jack said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Figured I'd get a head start before the heat kicks in." Clara nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "Barn's looking good." "Yeah," Jack agreed. "But it's going to take more than a fresh coat of paint to keep this place standing." She exhaled, her shoulders tensing slightly. "I know." Jack studied her. She was strong, stronger than most people he had ever met, but even the strongest people had their limits. "You think he's coming back?" Jack asked. Though he already knew the answer, Clara stared into the distance, watching the early morning sun bleed gold over her fields. "They always do." By midday the heat was relentless, but Jack kept working. Fixing the barn felt like fixing himself. Each nail, each repaired beam, each stroke of effort, it was all something solid, something that mattered. But the moment of quiet didn't last. A black pickup truck kicked up dust as it sped down the dirt road toward the farm. Jack recognized the driver even before he stepped out, a different man from yesterday, but the same kind of polished, soulless businessman. Jack dropped his hammer as the man climbed out of the truck, his expensive boots landing in the dust like he had never set foot on a real farm in his life. Clara walked out from the house, her expression unreadable. The man flashed a slick, confident smile. "Miss Hastings, I assume?" Clara crossed her arms. "Depends on who's asking." The man chuckled, clearly unfazed. "Name's Robert Klein. I work with Mr. Whitaker." Jack felt his jaw tighten. Of course he did. We wanted to follow. "Up on our previous discussion," Robert continued smoothly, "the investors are willing to make an even better offer. They see real potential in this land, Clara. A golf course, high-end residential developments. This could be something big." Clara didn't blink. "It already is." Robert sighed as if she were an irrational child, refusing to see reason. "Miss Hastings, let's be practical here. This farm isn't exactly profitable, and running it alone can't be easy. Why struggle when you could walk away with enough money to never work again?" Jack had heard enough. "You ever worked a day on a farm, Robert?" Jack asked, stepping forward. The man looked him up and down, as if noticing him for the first time. "I don't believe we've met." "Jack Reynolds," he said, holding his ground. "And you didn't answer my question." Robert chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Mr. Reynolds, I can't say that I have." Jack took a slow step closer. "Then you don't know a damn thing about what it takes to keep a place like this running. It's not about money, it's about history. It's about building something real, something that lasts." Robert's smirk never wavered. "That's a nice sentiment, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills." Clara stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "You have my answer, Mr. Klein." Robert sighed dramatically. "I had a feeling you'd be difficult. You should know. When my clients want something, they get it, one way or another." Jack felt his fists clench. But before he could take a step, Clara cut in. "You done?" she asked. Robert smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "For now." He climbed back into his truck, but before driving off, he rolled down the window. "You're making a mistake, Clara. This fight, it's not one you're going to win." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind a cloud of dust and tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Jack turned to Clara, frustration simmering beneath his skin. "You should have let me handle him." Clara shot him a glare. "And what would that have solved? You think I haven't dealt with men like him before?" Jack exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You shouldn't have to fight this alone." Clara stared at him for a long moment before looking away. "I'm used to it." Jack took a step closer. "That doesn't mean you have to." "A-B," she shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "And what, Jack? You're just going to stand here and promise you'll fight this with me? What happens when you get tired, when you decide this isn't your battle?" Jack felt the words hit deeper than they should have. He understood what she was really saying. People left. That's what they did. And maybe in the back of her mind she thought he would too. "I don't walk away from things that matter," Jack said quietly. Clara's gaze flickered to his, something unreadable in her expression. For a moment the air between them felt different. He could see the walls she had built, struggling to hold, could see the part of her that wanted to trust him, wanted to believe him, but then, just as quickly, she shut it down. "We should get back to work," she said, turning toward the barn. Jack let out a slow breath, watching her go. She was stubborn, guarded, afraid to hope. But Jack wasn't going anywhere, and whether she liked it or not, this fight, she wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Jack had always believed that the hardest battles weren't the ones fought with fists, but the ones fought in silence, the words left unsaid, the fears that crept in when no one was looking. And Clara Hastings was fighting a battle like that every single day. She wouldn't admit it, wouldn't let herself be vulnerable. She wore her independence like armor, and Jack knew better than to push. But that didn't mean he was going to let her fight alone, even if she wanted him to. By mid-afternoon, the heat was thick and unrelenting, the kind that stuck to your skin and made every breath feel heavy. Jack had spent the morning repairing the barn's roof while Clara worked the fields, but now something had changed. The wind had picked up, the once clear sky had darkened, clouds rolling in with a slow, creeping force. The air smelled of rain and something electric, something wild. Clara noticed it too. Jack saw her standing by the fence line, her brow furrowed as she scanned the horizon. "Weather changes fast out here," she murmured, almost to herself. Jack climbed down from the barn roof, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What's the call?" Clara's jaw tensed. "Storm's coming." Could be nothing, or could be bad. Either way, we need to lock things down. Without another word, she was already moving, securing tools, tying down equipment, making sure the horses were in their stalls. Jack followed suit, sensing that this wasn't just routine for her, this was preparation for a fight. An hour later, the sky was nearly black, the wind howling through the open fields like a warning. The first raindrops pelted against the tin roof of the barn, the scent of wet earth rising in the air. Then a crack of thunder split the sky. Jack was in the middle of securing a gate near the pasture when he heard Clara's sharp curse from across the field. He turned just in time to see what she was looking at. A section of the fence had broken loose in the wind, and the horses were panicked. "Damn it," Clara muttered, already moving. Jack was right behind her. "We need to get them." Back in the barn before the storm hits full force. Lightning flashed, illuminating the fear in the animals' eyes as they stamped nervously near the broken fence. The wind was loud now, whipping through the field, kicking up dust and debris. Clara moved without hesitation, stepping toward the closest horse, a chestnut mare, her hands steady, her voice low and soothing. Jack took the other side, keeping his movements calm but firm. He had never worked with horses before, but he knew fear when he saw it. "They're spooked," he said over the wind. Clara nodded. "If they bolt, we'll lose them in the storm." Together they worked in sync, guiding the horses back toward the barn one by one, despite the wind screaming around them. But just as they were leading the last horse through the gate, another clap of thunder sent the animal rearing back violently. Jack barely had time to react before the horse kicked out wildly, hooves slicing through the air. He grabbed Clara's arm, yanking her out of the way just as the hoof missed her by mere inches. They stumbled back together, his arms bracing around her, the force of the wind and the moment knocking the breath from both of them. For a second, everything was still. Her hands were gripping the front of his shirt, his arms still locked around her waist. Their faces were close, too close. Jack could feel her breath against his skin, could see the storm reflected in her eyes. Not just the one in the sky, but the one inside her, wild, untamed, something neither of them wanted to name. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice lower than it should have been. Clara's breathing was uneven, but she nodded. "Yeah." Neither of them moved, not right away. Then, as if remembering herself, Clara cleared her throat, stepping back quickly. We should get inside before it gets worse." Jack let her go, watching as she turned toward the barn, but the way her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her shirt. He had noticed, and he had a feeling she had noticed it too. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn there was another kind of storm, one Jack wasn't sure how to navigate. They had managed to secure everything, the horses now calm in their stalls. The barn doors shut tight, but the air between him and Clara was different now, tighter, charged. Jack leaned against the wooden stall, exhaling. That could have gone worse. Clara let out a dry laugh, running a hand through her damp hair. "Yeah, We could have been trampled to death. Real improvement, Jack smirked. Glad to see you're looking on the bright side. Clara shot him a look, but there was something softer behind it. Something he hadn't seen before. Silence stretched between them. The kind filled with unsaid things. Then, finally, Clara sighed, her voice quieter. You didn't have to do that, you know, Jack frowned. Do what? Pull me out of the way. He looked at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't used to being saved. Jack exhaled, running a hand down his face. Clara, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. She blinked. What? Jack pushed off the stall, stepping closer. You think I was just going to stand there and let you get kicked in the ribs by a damn horse? Clara folded her arms, clearly uncomfortable. I can take care of myself. Jack shook his head. Yeah, I know you can, but that doesn't mean you always have to. The words hung between them, heavy, filled with a meaning neither of them was ready to confront. Another crash of thunder rattled the barn, making the horses stir in their stalls. Clara looked away first. You should get some rest. We'll have a mess to clean up in the morning. Jack studied her for a moment longer before nodding. Yeah, guess we will. But as he turned to leave, something inside him told him that this storm wasn't over yet. Not the one outside, not the one between them, and certainly not the one in his chest every time he looked at her. The world outside the barn was a mess of broken fences, fallen branches, and churned-up mud. The storm had passed in the early hours of the morning, leaving behind an eerie stillness that seemed to settle over the land like an unspoken warning. Jack stood at the edge of the field, surveying the damage. He had seen his fair share of storms, both the kind that tore through landscapes and the kind that tore through people. This farm had survived both. But the storm between him and Clara, that was still brewing. By the time Clara emerged from the house, the sky was a soft blue, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, one of which she handed to Jack without a word. He took it, nodding his thanks. For a while, they just stood there, side by side, watching the sun rise over the shattered fence line and the scattered debris. I'll start fixing the fence after breakfast, Jack finally said, breaking the silence. Clara exhaled slowly, running a hand through her tangled hair. You don't have to. Jack turned to her, eyebrows raised. You want to leave it like that? No, she admitted, taking a sip of coffee, but I can handle it. Jack huffed out a laugh, shaking his head. Clara, we've been over this. You don't have to handle everything alone. Her grip tightened around her coffee mug. Jack, I know you don't like it, he interrupted, his voice quieter now. I know you're used to standing on your own, but I'm here. Let me be here. Clara didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared out at the ruined fence, her jaw tight, her eyes unreadable. Then finally she let out a sigh. Fine. But if you're gonna help, don't expect me to start giving out thank you speeches. Jack smirked. Noted. A flicker of something almost playful passed between them. But just as quickly, Clara turned away, retreating back toward the house. Jack watched her go, knowing this wasn't over, not even close. By mid-morning, they had set to work repairing the damage. Jack drove posts into the ground, reinforcing the sections that had taken the worst hit. Clara worked beside him, silent but focused, her movements precise and efficient. For a while, neither of them spoke, but the tension from last night still lingered, thick as the humidity in the air. Jack finally broke the silence. You ever think about leaving? Clara paused mid-swing, the hammer still gripped in her hand. Leaving? She repeated. Jack shrugged, adjusting the wire fencing. Yeah, I mean, all the pressure, the developers breathing down your neck, the storms tearing everything apart. Ever think about selling and starting fresh somewhere else? Clara set the hammer down with a deliberate slowness, turning to face him fully. This farm is my fresh start, she said, her voice steady but quiet. Jack studied her, sensing that there was more beneath those words than she was willing to. Share. And before this? He asked. Clara hesitated. Then, almost too casually, she said, "Before this, I was lost." Jack frowned. He had never heard her talk about what came before, not in any real way. "What do you mean?" he asked, softer now. Clara exhaled, gripping the fence post like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "My parents died when I was young. My granddad raised me, and this farm became my whole world." She looked down, kicking at a loose rock with the toe of her boot. "After he passed, I thought about leaving. I even did, for a little while." Jack stayed silent, letting her continue. "I moved to Dallas," she admitted, almost reluctantly. "Took a job, tried to fit into the life I thought I was supposed to want, but it never felt real. It felt like I was trying to be someone I wasn't." She glanced at Jack then, and for the first time, he saw something raw and vulnerable beneath. "All that strength. I came back because this is where I belong," she said simply, "and I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me." Jack felt something shift inside him. He knew what it was like to be adrift, to feel like you were searching for something that kept slipping through your fingers. And for the first time since he had arrived here, he wondered if maybe this place could be his fresh start too. They worked in silence for another hour, but the air between them had changed. The fence wasn't the only thing being mended. There was something else here, something neither of them wanted to name. At one point, Clara stretched to secure a wire, her shirt rising slightly, exposing a faint scar along her ribcage. It was old, but noticeable. Jack saw it before she could hide it. "What happened there?" he asked, nodding toward the scar. Clara stiffened, her hand instinctively dropping her shirt back down. "An old mistake," she said flatly. Jack frowned but didn't push. Instead, he simply said, "I've got a few of those too." Clara's eyes flicked to his, something unreadable passing between them. Then softer this time, she nodded. They didn't need to say anything else. Sometimes the past didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. By late afternoon, the fence was finally finished. The storm's damage had been repaired, but the tension between them remained, unspoken, charged, impossible to ignore. Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead, exhaling. "Not bad." Clara dusted off her hands. "We make a good team." Jack turned to her, and for a second neither of them looked away. The wind had died down, but the electricity between them hadn't. Jack wasn't a fool. He knew what this was, and he knew that Clara felt it too. But just as he was about to say something, Tommy's voice called out from the house, "Dad! Clara! Dinner's ready!" Clara blinked, stepping back like she had just realized how close they were standing. Jack sighed internally, but forced a smirk. "Guess we should eat?" Clara nodded, already turning toward the house. "Yeah, we should." But as Jack followed her inside, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and sooner or later one of them was going to have to face it. Jack had always believed in keeping his distance. Life had taught him that getting too close to something, or someone, only made it hurt more when it was eventually taken away. But out here, on Clara's farm, something was shifting. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stop it. Dinner at Clara's house had become a new kind of normal, something that both comforted and unsettled Jack. Tommy had quickly settled into his own rhythm here, chatting easily with Clara over plates of roasted chicken and fresh cornbread. It was a sight Jack hadn't seen in a long time, his son laughing, talking, at ease. And then there was Clara. She wasn't the kind of woman who tried to make people feel comfortable. She didn't fill silences with unnecessary words or soften her edges to make things easier. But somehow, being around her felt easy anyway. As dinner wrapped up, Tommy yawned and stretched in his chair. Jack smirked. "Looks like someone's ready to pass out." Tommy rubbed his eyes, blinking sleepily. "I'm not tired." Clara arched an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. I'd believe that more if you weren't halfway asleep in your mashed potatoes. Tommy huffed, but didn't argue. He turned to Jack. Can I sleep in the loft again? Jack hesitated. They had been staying in the guest house, but last night, when the storm rolled in, Tommy had asked if he could sleep in the barn loft instead. Something about the sounds of the farm at night, the smell of hay and wood, had helped him sleep better. Clara glanced at Jack, giving him a small nod. Jack sighed. All right, kid, but if you get eaten by raccoons, don't blame me. Tommy grinned, already hopping down from his chair. I'll be fine. Night, Clara. Clara smirked. Night, Tommy. Jack watched as his son disappeared out the door, a familiar warmth settling in his chest. His boy was happy here, and that meant something. The house felt different once Tommy was gone, quieter, heavier. Jack leaned back in his chair, letting out a low breath. That kid's got more energy than I know what to do with. Clara, sitting across from him, smirked. He reminds me of my granddad, always finding new ways to get into trouble. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. I appreciate you letting him stay in the loft. He seems calmer here. Clara studied him for a moment. So do you, Jack looked up, his smirk fading. Something about the way she said it, soft but certain, made his pulse skip. He didn't know how to respond to that. So instead, he reached for his beer bottle, taking a slow sip. This place has a way of getting under your skin. Clara hummed, in agreement, swirling the whiskey in her glass. Yeah, it does. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night air drifted in through the open windows, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and wildflowers. Then, Clara set her glass down and exhaled. Jack. Something in her voice made him tense. When he met her gaze, there was something raw there, something unguarded. I don't let people in easily, she admitted. You've probably noticed. Jack gave a small, knowing smirk. A little. Clara didn't smile. It's not because I don't want to. It's because every time I have, I've regretted it. Jack set his bottle down, watching her closely. She exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over her jaw. People leave, or they let you down, or they make promises they can't keep. And I've spent too much of my life learning that lesson the hard way. Jack understood that too well. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. I get it. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him. Do you? Jack's jaw tightened. Memories flashed through his mind. Emily's laugh, the sound of sirens, the feeling of standing in a hospital waiting room, knowing that everything was about to fall apart. Yeah, he got it. Better than she knew. Instead of saying that, he simply nodded. Yeah. Something shifted in her expression. She reached for her glass again, but didn't drink, just stared at the amber liquid like it held answers she wasn't ready for. Then, softly, almost reluctantly, she said, I don't know what to do with you, Jack Reynolds. Jack let out a low, rough chuckle, shaking his head. What's that supposed to mean? Clara exhaled, tapping her fingers against the table. I've spent years keeping people at arm's length. And then you show up, and you... She stopped, shaking her head like she couldn't quite find the right words. Jack's heart thumped hard against his ribs. He could hear what she wasn't saying, what she wasn't ready to say. So instead of pushing, instead of demanding answers she wasn't ready to give, he did the only thing that felt right. He stood up. Clara's gaze followed him as he rounded the table, coming to stand in front of her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Jack reached out, his calloused fingers brushing against her hand. Just a touch, just enough to say, I'm here. Clara didn't pull away. She let him touch her, let him be close, and for someone like her, Jack knew that meant everything. Her breath hitched slightly, but she held his gaze, and for the first time she didn't look away. Jack lifted his free hand, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her skin for just a second too long. And Clara let him. The air between them was thick and charged, the kind of moment that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be undone. Jack's voice was low when he finally spoke. "Tell me to walk away, and I will." Clara swallowed, her lips slightly parted. But she didn't say anything, didn't move, didn't tell him to leave. Jack felt his chest tighten. He could kiss her right now. He could close the space between them, take what they both knew was there, but instead he pulled back just slightly, enough to let her breathe, enough to let her decide. Clara let out a shaky exhale, like she was trying to regain control of something that had already slipped through her fingers. Then she stepped back. Not far, just enough. Jack nodded once, understanding. Okay. Clara looked down, biting her lip like she wasn't sure if she had just made the right choice or the biggest mistake of her life. Jack let out a breath, stepping back toward the door. "Good night, Clara." She didn't respond right away, but just as he reached the doorway, her voice stopped him. "Jack." He turned. Clara hesitated. Then quietly she said, "Good night." Jack didn't say anything else. He just gave her one last look before stepping outside into the night, because for now that was enough. For now, but not forever. Jack had spent most of his life running from things, from pain, from loss, from the mistakes that sat heavy on his chest every night. But for the first time in a long time, he had stopped running, and it had everything to do with Clara Hastings. But she was still holding on to something she wasn't ready to let go of. Jack didn't blame her. He knew what it was like to carry a past too heavy to put down, but sooner or later, something had to give. The morning after their almost kiss, Clara was avoiding him. Jack knew, because she was damn obvious about it. Usually, she was the first one. Out by the barn, checking on the animals, fixing what needed fixing. But today, she was nowhere to be found. Tommy, oblivious to the tension, ran across the field with one of the farm dogs, laughing as he chased after it. Jack watched him for a moment, his chest tightening. His boy was happy here, and that scared the hell out of him, because deep down, Jack knew this wasn't just a temporary stop anymore. This place, this woman, they had started to feel like something permanent. And permanence. That was something Jack hadn't let himself believe in since Emily died. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw before turning toward the house. If Clara wanted to pretend last night never happened, fine, but she wasn't going to shut him out. Not anymore. Jack found Clara in the barn, her back to him as she stacked bales of hay like she was trying to work through something she didn't want to think about. "Planning on avoiding me forever?" Jack leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms. Clara didn't turn around. "I'm not avoiding you." Jack huffed out a dry laugh. "Yeah? Then why'd you disappear this morning?" Clara paused, her fingers tightening around the twine of a hay bale. "I had things to do." Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Clara." She finally turned, meeting his gaze. And there it was, that same damn tension, that same unspoken truth sitting between them, thick as the summer heat. "You regret last night," Jack said. Not as a question, but as a statement. Clara's jaw tensed. She exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. "I don't know what you want me to say, Jack." Jack stepped closer. The truth would be a good start. Clara swallowed, her hazel eyes flickering with something uncertain. "I don't regret it, but I don't know how to—" She cut herself off, shaking her head. Jack's throat tightened. He knew that feeling, the feeling of standing on the edge of something big, something terrifying. "You don't have to figure it out right now," he said softly. Clara looked at him, something vulnerable flickering across her face. "What if I can't figure it out at all?" Jack let out a slow breath. "Then I'll wait." She blinked, like she hadn't expected that answer. Jack stepped closer. Not touching her, not pushing, just letting her know he was there. "You don't have to do this alone, Clara," he said quietly. "You don't have to be alone." She didn't say anything, but she didn't move away either. And for now, that was enough. That peace didn't last long. By mid-afternoon, Jack spotted a familiar black SUV kicking up dust down the road. Simon Whitaker. Jack clenched his jaw, stepping off the porch just as Clara emerged from the barn, her expression already darkening. "Back again so soon?" "She," said dryly as Simon stepped out of the vehicle, his suit somehow untouched by the dust swirling around him. Simon smirked. "Miss Hastings, always a pleasure." Jack hated him on sight. Simon's eyes flicked to Jack, his smirk widening. "And I see you've picked up a new farmhand." Jack took a step forward, his posture unmistakably defensive. "Something like that," Clara cut in before Simon could reply. "What do you want?" Simon sighed, mock disappointment written all over his face. "You make it sound like I'm the bad guy here. I'm just here to remind you of our offer. The investors are getting impatient." "My answer hasn't changed." Simon's smile faltered slightly. "Clara, be reasonable. You can't run this place forever, and when it eventually falls apart—" "It won't," Jack interrupted. Simon turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you get out of this, Mr. Reynolds?" Jack held his ground. "Doesn't matter. But I can tell you one thing. You're wasting your time here." Simon's gaze hardened. "You really think you can save this place?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I do." Simon studied him for a long moment before shaking his head. "You're making a mistake." Clara crossed her arms. "No, you are." Simon exhaled sharply, clearly losing patience. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked back to his SUV. The moment the car disappeared down the road, Clara let out a long, slow breath. Jack turned to her. "He's not giving up," Clara nodded. "I know." Jack studied her, his voice quieter now. "And neither are you?" Clara looked at him then, something fierce and unbreakable in her eyes. "No," she said, "I'm not." Jack felt something settle inside him. This fight wasn't over. But he had made his decision. He wasn't going anywhere. That night, as the crickets hummed and the stars spilled across the Texas sky, Jack found himself sitting on the porch with Clara again. She was quieter than usual, nursing a glass of whiskey, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you still here, Jack?" Jack glanced at her, taking a slow sip of his beer. "Because I want to be." Clara let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. "That simple, huh?" Jack studied her, his voice steady. "Yeah, it is." Clara looked away, shaking her head. "You make it sound easy." Jack leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "It's not, but it's worth it." Clara swallowed, her fingers tightening around her glass. "I don't know how to let myself believe that." Jack exhaled, his voice softer now. "Then let me help you." Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his, like she was looking for something she wasn't sure she'd find. And for the first time, Jack saw the walls begin to crack. She didn't say anything, but this time she didn't pull away. And for now, that was enough. But Jack knew it wouldn't be enough for long. Jack had always known that peace never lasted. For weeks, he had been settling into this place, into a life that felt more real than anything had in years. The rhythm of farm work, the quiet dinners on Clara's porch, Tommy running through the fields like he'd lived here forever. Jack had started to believe in the idea of staying, and that was when everything started falling apart. The day started like any other. The sun rising over the fields, the scent of damp earth still lingering from last night's rain. Jack was already at work, checking the fence line, when he heard the sound of Clara's truck pulling up behind him. Something about the way she climbed out, her movements tense, her face unreadable, made his gut tighten. "We've got a problem," she said. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans, bracing himself. "What kind?" Clara exhaled sharply, tossing him a folder. "You tell me." Jack flipped it open, his eyes narrowing at the official-looking documents inside, and then he saw it, a notice of intent to seize the property. He looked up sharply. "What the hell is this?" Clara crossed her arms, her jaw clenched. "Simon's. People filed it yesterday. If I don't sell, they're going to claim eminent domain, say the land is better used for development." Jack felt his chest tighten. Eminent domain. It was a loophole corporations used when they wanted land bad enough. If the local government backed them, Clara could be forced to sell, whether she wanted to or not. Jack's fingers tightened around the papers. "They can't do this." Clara's laugh was short, humorless. "They can, and they are." Jack exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He should have seen this coming. The moment Simon realized Clara wasn't backing down, he was going to play dirty, and now he had. Jack followed Clara back to the house, both of them tense. Inside, she slammed the documents onto the table and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking like she was holding herself together by sheer willpower. Jack set his hands on the table, steady but firm. "So, what's the plan?" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "You think I have one?" Jack frowned. "You always have a plan." "Not this time," she admitted, her voice quieter. Jack felt something in his chest tighten. Clara never admitted defeat, and now she was standing there looking at him like she was one wrong move away from falling apart. "You're not alone in this," Jack said. Clara exhaled. "Aren't I?" Jack stepped closer. "No, you're not." Something flickered in her expression. Something raw, something scared. Jack could see it, the way she was holding herself back, afraid to let someone in, afraid to believe she didn't have to do this alone, and for the first time, he wasn't going to let her push him away. "You don't have to fight this alone, Clara." She shook her head. "And what happens when you leave, Jack?" Jack's breath caught. Clara's voice was softer now, but no less fierce. "You say you're staying. You say I don't have to do this alone. But what happens when it gets too hard? When it stops being new and starts being real?" Jack swallowed hard. "You think I'm the kind of man who walks away?" Clara exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think everybody leaves eventually." Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Because he knew exactly what that kind of fear felt like. Slowly, carefully, he reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "I'm not everybody." Clara didn't pull away, but she didn't step closer either. For a long moment, they just stood there. Then, finally, she spoke. "I don't know how to let myself believe that." Jack let out a slow breath. "Then let me prove it to you." She looked up at him then, something unspoken flickering in her eyes, and Jack knew. This was it. This was the moment. She could push him away, or she could finally let him in. But before either of them could say anything else, the phone rang. Clara hesitated, then stepped back, breaking the moment as she reached for the receiver. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing himself to exhale. Not yet, but soon. The phone call was from the county office. By the time Clara hung up, her face was pale, her hands shaking. Jack stepped closer. "What is it?" She swallowed hard. "The county's holding a hearing about the land seizure." She let out a slow breath. "In 3 days." Jack felt his fists clench. "They're moving fast." Clara nodded, staring at the papers on the table. "I don't know if I can stop them." Jack exhaled, his voice quiet but steady. "You don't have to do it alone." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and this time she didn't argue. She just nodded, and Jack knew. She was finally letting him stand beside her, and no matter what happened next, he wasn't going anywhere. Jack had seen his fair share of battles, but this was different. Standing in the county courthouse, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits and developers who saw nothing but profit in the land Clara had spent her whole life protecting, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years. purpose. This wasn't just about saving a farm. This was about saving something real, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in his life, Jack wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her. The hearing room was small but packed, the air thick with anticipation. Clara sat beside Jack, her spine rigid, her fingers gripping the stack of documents in front of her, like they were the only thing keeping her steady. Simon Whitaker sat across the room, his usual smug smirk in place. His lawyer, a polished man with a voice smooth as silk, was already talking. "The Hastings property is an underutilized asset," the man said, gesturing toward a large map of the proposed development plan. "It's not profitable. It's falling apart. The town would benefit from the jobs and revenue this project would bring." Jack felt Clara stiffen beside him. He reached under the table, lightly brushing his fingers against hers, a simple touch, a silent promise. She exhaled slowly. Then finally, it was Clara's turn. She stood, her voice calm but unwavering. "This isn't just land," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's history, it's family. It's a part of this town in a way that no shopping mall or golf course ever could be." She set a stack of letters onto the table. "These are from local farmers, neighbors, people who rely on this land, people who want it to stay exactly as it is." Jack watched as the tone in the room shifted. People started listening, and then, when she looked over at him, something passed between them, a quiet understanding. Jack stood. "I came here looking for a fresh start," he said, his voice steady. "And I found one, because places like this, people like Clara, they don't just grow crops, they grow roots. They build things that last." He turned to Simon, his eyes cold and unwavering. "And no amount of money can replace that." For the first time, Simon looked unsure, and when the county officials announced their decision that the claim of eminent domain was denied, the room erupted in whispers. Clara let out a sharp breath, her hands trembling as she grasped the edge. Of the table, she had won. She had saved everything, and Jack had never been prouder of anyone in his life. The farm felt different that evening, lighter, like the weight of the world had finally been lifted. Jack stood near the barn, watching as Tommy chased fireflies across the field, laughing as he ran, and then, behind him, Clara. She stepped closer, stopping beside him, her arms crossed. "So, we did it," Jack turned, smirking. "No, you did it," she huffed. "You helped." Jack chuckled. "A little." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then softly she said, "I don't know how to thank you." Jack's chest tightened. He knew what this meant to her, so he just shrugged. "You don't have to." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and before Jack could say anything else, she moved a step closer, a hesitation. And then, finally, she kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was a slow, quiet, undeniable thing, like coming home, like something that had been waiting to happen for a long, long time. Jack deepened the kiss, his hands sliding around her waist, pulling her closer, and for the first time, Clara didn't pull away. For the first time, she let herself believe in something that wasn't just hers to carry. When they finally pulled apart, Clara exhaled a laugh, shaking her head. "Took us long enough," Jack smirked. "Yeah, but worth the wait." She smiled, a real, honest-to-God smile, and Jack knew this wasn't just a place to stay. This was home. The farm was thriving. The fields were fuller than ever, the barn restored, stronger than before. Jack had built a woodworking shop near the house, where he spent his days making furniture, fixing fences, building things that would last. Tommy ran barefoot through the fields, his laughter ringing in the summer air. And Clara? She was beside him. She was his. Jack sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Clara slid into the seat beside him, handing him a cold beer. He took it, smirking. "You gonna start charging me rent?" Clara rolled, her eyes nudging his shoulder. "I think you've earned your keep." Jack exhaled, letting the moment settle in his chest. For so long he had been lost, running, searching, but not anymore. Not here, not with her. Clara glanced over at him, her eyes warm, steady. "You staying for good, Reynolds?" Jack smirked. "What do you think?" Clara just smiled, leaning in, and as Jack kissed her under the fading Texas sky, he knew one thing for sure. Some things were worth fighting for, some places worth calling home, and some loves. They were meant to last, and that, my friends, was the story of Jack and Clara, a story about love, resilience, and finding home in the most unexpected places. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? Are you tuning in from a cozy hometown, a big city, or somewhere out in the countryside like Clara's farm? I'd love to know. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more heartwarming, inspiring tales just like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and I can't wait to share more with you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Whether you're here for the first time or you've been a part of this journey for a while, I appreciate you more than you know. Take care, stay inspired, and until next time, keep believing in love, kindness, and second chances.